Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Torah View. Walk into any bookstore, and one of the largest, if not the largest section, is the self-help personal growth section. Clearly, people are trying to grow, and just as clear is that people are struggling to find ways to do it. In a recent study, listed as some of the main obstacles for personal growth are A, the embracing of averageness, 2, fear, and 3, the pursuit of perfection. In other words, we have to let go of all of those things if we really want to grow. This week, not only do we read a Torah portion, but we start the third book of the Torah called Vayikra, aka the book of Leviticus, which largely centers around the subject of animal sacrifices that were brought in the temple. Now let's be honest, the contemporary mind has a hard time wrapping itself around this whole idea of animal sacrifices. What's really astonishing is how much real estate it occupies in Torah. And more than that, of all the mitzvot and all of the ways to serve God that are identified in the Torah, only one does God explicitly say, now this gives me tremendous pleasure. And that is the animal sacrifice. The big question is, what gives? What is this thing about an animal sacrifice? Now, there were two possibilities, generally speaking, as to why someone would give or offer an animal sacrifice. One is out of personal choice and volition. It could be someone wakes up one day inspired, wanting to show gratitude to God. The animal sacrifice was a means and a way to be able to do that. So it was an expression of gratitude. We find that a lot in the Torah, particularly before the temple was built. Then, and the most common form of sacrifice is as a means of atonement for the commission of sin. Which only begs the question, how does offering an animal on the altar atone for sin? And why is the poor animal the one that needs to pay the price for our commission of sin? So let me give you two perspectives. The first is that of all of God's creations, the animal is most similar to man. And in that regard, the animal serves as a proxy, really, for the individual who has sinned, and its offering on the altar therefore brings atonement. You see, it wasn't simply a matter of rocking up to the temple with an animal and dropping it off and telling the priest to take care of business. The person had to see the animal as an agent of their own selves. And before the animal was actually brought onto the altar and slaughtered, the Kohen, the priest, would place his hands on the animals. This was called smicha. And the placing of the hands of the animal was a means of transferring the energy of the person to the animal. And so witnessing that was a means of atonement for the sinner. So it's really the animal acting as a proxy for the person. But I want to take it one step further and deeper, as elucidated by the mystics, and particularly the Hasidic masters. You see, within all of us, there's an animal. The animal within is what derails us from the pursuit of purpose and meaning. And it is the part of us that accounts for our human frailties and foibles, and when we stumble and fall prey to the pleasure of the moment. Every one of us has to contend with our inner animal. And for many, that becomes the great obstacle to the pursuit of growth and improvement, because we feel resigned to the fact that I'm never going to be much more than a biological being that is driven by self-preservation and by pleasure. So herein lies the great power of the animal sacrifice, and why God considers that to be the most pleasurable of all human experiences. You see, what God is saying is this: I'm the one who planted this animal soul within you. I don't expect perfection out of you. But when you take that animal within yourself and bring it to the altar, it doesn't cease to be an animal. It remains an animal. But you have given something of yourself. You have sacrificed a moment of pleasure, sacrificed a moment of time when you could have been doing something for yourself and instead do for others. God says, that gives me more pleasure than anything else. That gives me more pleasure than the perfect harmony of the angels singing in unison in heaven. When a human being struggles mightily to pierce through that veil of personal darkness created by the inner animal, and we bring it on the altar. Sacrifice doesn't mean giving up our lives. Sacrifice means just giving up a moment of self-interest and dedicating a moment to service, to others, to purpose. That, says God, is my biggest nachas. That is my greatest pleasure. They say a story, some say it's a Chinese proverb, about a man who used to walk every day down to a well with 2 buckets. And one of the buckets was cracked, one of the buckets was whole. One day the cracked bucket says to the man, I feel so bad that every day by the time you bring me back to your homestead, I'm only half full, and I feel terrible about that. And the man said, Dear bucket, don't feel bad at all. You see, I planted seeds all along the pathway that I walk every day. And as I walk back to the home, your bucket allows the water to seep through, and that has given rise to a beautiful garden. So you see, out of your cracks and your imperfection, something very beautiful has grown. So you see, the greatest growth in life comes specifically out of our greatest challenges. Out of the greatest darkness comes the greatest light. Or, as Leonard Cohen put it, forget about your perfect offering. The cracks are what allow the light to come in. So the great story of the sacrifices, of the animal sacrifice, is that life is not about the pursuit of perfection. Life is a story of struggle, but it's about piercing through those cracks and experiencing an exquisite light that can only be experienced through struggling with the inner animal and overcoming, transcending ourselves even for just the briefest of moments. And that brings the greatest pleasure joy, and nachas to God Almighty. Wishing you Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for joining us.